The neighbors had complained about the smell. At first it was faint, just a sour edge in the air as you passed the third-floor landing of a quiet Tokyo apartment building. They thought maybe someone had left food out too long, maybe a clogged drain, but it didn't go away. By the second week, the scent grew heavier, more insistent. It clung to the hallway, seeped into the fabric of your clothes, and stirred something primal in the back of your throat. The kind of reaction no one likes to talk about. Because beneath the layers of stale air and mildew, there was something unmistakable. The smell of decay. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect it. The building was old, sure, but well-maintained. Working class. People kept to themselves. Neighbors nodded politely and locked their doors. And in apartment 303, a one-room flat with paper-thin walls and a narrow balcony, no one had seen the tenant in weeks. When the landlord finally unlocked the door, he braced himself for what he thought he'd find. A man in his 60s, alone, perhaps collapsed from a stroke or heart attack. That wouldn't be unusual in Japan, where kodokushi, or lonely death, has become a grim common phrase. An aging population. Rising social isolation. People dying in silence, unnoticed for days or weeks. And in apartment 303, the scene was almost textbook. The man, later identified as 67-year-old Mitsuo Kobayashi, was found dead on the floor, partially decomposed, slumped near the kitchenette. The stench was thick and cloying. His television was still on, buzzing with static. There were empty beer cans on the table. His phone had gone unanswered for over a month. But when the hazmat cleanup crew arrived, something didn't add up. As they began to remove the furniture to sanitize the apartment, one worker lifted the mattress and froze. Beneath it, wrapped in a blanket and pressed between the wooden slats of the bed frame, was a second corpse. Smaller, much smaller. The bones were brittle and yellowed. The hair, still partially clinging to the scalp, was long and dark. She was curled into a fetal position, knees drawn up to her chest, arms tucked in tightly, as if she had once tried to make herself invisible beneath the man's bed. But she hadn't just been hidden. She had been there for years. The forensics team arrived within hours. As the body was carefully extracted and laid out on the tiled floor for examination, the scope of the horror began to take shape. This was no adult woman. The skeleton belonged to a teenage girl. Her age was estimated between 16 and 18 years old. She had likely died of blunt force trauma to the head. There were old fractures on her ribs. The cause of death was undetermined, but there were no signs that she had died of natural causes. And in the apartment, not a single trace of her presence. No ID, no photos, no belongings. She had not been registered as a resident. There was no family name to attach to the body, no missing persons report that matched. It was as if she had been erased. Only one fact was clear. She had lived and died in the same apartment as Mitsuo Kobayashi, and he had never said a word. Tokyo police opened a homicide investigation immediately. But there was a problem. Kobayashi was dead. The only person who might have known how or why the girl had died, and how she ended up stuffed under his bed like a discarded piece of furniture, was now beyond questioning. So they began to work backward. Neighbors remembered the man only vaguely. He kept to himself. He had lived in apartment 303 for nearly 2 decades, working part-time jobs here and there. Quiet, not especially friendly, but not the kind of man anyone thought twice about. The kind of man you forget the moment the elevator doors close. There were no criminal records, no known history of abuse or violence, and yet there had been rumors. Whispers about strange sounds in the night. The shuffle of footsteps when no one was home. A girl's voice, some neighbors claimed. Laughter, then silence. But no one reported it. In a city like Tokyo, where privacy is sacrosanct and people live stacked like boxes on top of each other, You learn not to ask questions. You mind your business, even when something feels wrong. Especially when something feels wrong. The autopsy revealed more. The girl had likely died in the early 2000s, more than a decade before Kobayashi's own death. That meant he had slept inches above her corpse every night for over 10 years. He had moved the bed several times, cleaned the floor, hosted a visitor once or twice, but never removed her, never reported her, never explained anything. Police searched through his belongings for answers, hoping for a letter, a journal, a photograph, something to explain the unthinkable. But there was nothing. No writings, no evidence of guilt, just the quiet detritus of a lonely life, receipts, television guides, discount coupons, and one old Nokia phone with a dead battery and no SIM card. The only clue came from a single yellowed notebook, found in the kitchen drawer. Not a diary, a ledger, dull and methodical. It listed grocery purchases, rent payments, dates of seasonal allergies, and one strange entry from 2004, sick, she's not waking up. Nothing more, no names, no date of death, no confession, no explanation. Police turned to missing persons reports. They cross-checked every girl who had vanished in the area between 2000 and 2005. Most had been accounted for. Some had run away and returned. Some had died in unrelated incidents. But one file remained open. A high school girl, 17 years old, who had disappeared after school in 2003. Her name was withheld from the public, but she had lived just a few blocks away. Last seen walking home in her school uniform. Her mother had filed a report within 24 hours. She was never found. Until now. DNA samples were matched. It took weeks, but eventually authorities confirmed the skeleton's identity. It was her. The girl under the bed had a name again. But even with that knowledge, the mystery deepened. Because Mitsuo Kobayashi wasn't listed as someone she had known. He wasn't a relative, not a teacher, not a neighbor, just a man. And no one could explain how she had ended up in his apartment, or why he had kept her there. Speculation ran wild. Some believed it was a kidnapping gone wrong, that Kobayashi had abducted the girl and held her captive, then panicked when she died. That he hid her out of fear, out of guilt. Others thought it was something darker. That he had murdered her intentionally and kept her body close, not out of panic, but obsession, a warped trophy, a constant silent companion under the bed. Some forensic psychologists weighed in anonymously through the media. They pointed out the signs of necrophilic possession, not necessarily sexual in nature, but a pathological desire to own the deceased, to keep them frozen in time, forever present, never leaving. In other words, he didn't want her to be gone. But there was no proof, no history of mental illness, no known delusions, just an empty room and a dead man, and a girl who never made it home. What unsettled the public most wasn't just the crime, it was the duration. 10 years. 10 years of grocery shopping, of television reruns, of casual conversation with the landlord, of daily routines and clean floors and quiet nights, all with a corpse tucked beneath the bed. He changed his sheets. He vacuumed. He cooked simple meals and drank his beer and occasionally looked out the window, with her body 3 feet below, and no one ever suspected. Not once. The apartment was fumigated, stripped down to the walls, cleaned and repainted, but it never rented again. Eventually, the landlord locked the door permanently and let the unit sit empty. Dust gathered in the corners. Paint flaked from the windowsill. The room was silent. But people remembered. And on certain nights, when the hallway lights flickered and the air turned still, the neighbors said they could almost hear something moving in apartment 303. Something soft, like the rustle of a blanket on a bed. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.